สบชัยชนะสัพพะอันตรายจงพินาศไป
นะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังนะมาสามิ Good afternoon and welcome to the third one of these Sunday afternoon talks during the this Vasa period, the Rains Retreat period. The theme for the talk today is Who Am I? Which I probably don't need to say is not just about who this person is, but who all of us are, and that kind of inquiry that has been made by human beings, individuals over many thousands of years. As we start to grow up from our childhood into adolescence and going into adulthood and develop ourselves, discover ourselves as individuals, then this is often a kind of question that we ask ourselves: what's our real identity? Who are we? Because we, as we grow up, we begin to experience different perceptions of ourselves, the ways that other people see us, the varieties of different situations we find ourselves in, and so it's very natural to inquire, to explore. Well, what's the real me? What's the person here that's important? What's the real thing? And when reflecting on this question, I was recollecting a talk I gave many years ago that was exactly on this kind of theme, and I was thinking about it, remembering it, and the example I gave was from my own childhood, where I grew up in Kent, in the countryside, and as I was growing up through my teens, and when I was then leaving home and going off to college in London University, I began to realize that I lived in about 5 different worlds, and I was seen as 5 different people. And each of these worlds were kind of distinct from each other. And so this sort of question of, well, who am I? What's the real me in all of this? So as I said, I grew up in the countryside. My parents were very average middle-class English country people. They were farmers. And the kind of environment I grew up in was with lots of dogs and horses. And so growing up in the countryside, then I went to lots of gymkhanas and horse shows, and grew up amongst that sort of horse riding set. And there were people who were into hunting, shooting, fishing. In the winter season, there would be fox hunting and such like. And so as a child, and growing up and going to these different competitions with ponies and horses, then I was very much identified with that world. So I was within that world. I was seen as one of that crowd, the horse riding, fox hunting crowd. I think maybe some kind of karmic relationship I had with non-violence is that every fox hunt I ever went on, they never caught a fox. So I was a member of the Ashford Valley Hunt. and they never caught a fox when I was out with the hunt. So I'm sure the foxes are grateful. So there was that kind of hunting, shooting, fishing world, and then every summer I would either be part of or help out at the Pony Club's summer camp, and be part of all of that. And that was one of the worlds I lived in. Then there was my family, and my parents and grandparents, and my role as the youngest child of 3 children, 2 sisters, and the family stories and family history, and so there was the family world. Then there was the school, the people I went to school with. It was a local boarding school. I was a day pupil, but then the people that I grew up with and were my school friends, they were a separate crowd altogether. So there's very, very little overlap between them and the fox hunting crowd. So there's a sort of hard drinking, partying, public school rowdies that I spent a lot of my youth with. That's where my accent comes from. From Sutton Valence School in Kent. And so that was a third world. And then living in London, I was at London University. I was a student studying psychology and physiology at Bedford College, London University. At that time, it was in Regent's Park in the middle of London. So there was my role as a student, not a very diligent student, but still, that was how I was seen, as someone in the physiology department, psychology department, someone studying for a degree and involved in that world of academic papers and writing essays and doing experiments and all of that. And then there was the people that I tended to hang out with in London, who were this sort of hippie, anarchist, countercultural crowd. This was the mid-70s, so there was this, and my college was in Regent's Park, and there was this huge squat, what was called Cornwall Terrace, one of the Robert Adam terraces. A few of you probably might have even been there. Hello. We meet again. But Cornwall Terrace was an extremely posh building that was occupied by a large number of wild and woolly hippies and anarchists and freewheeling types. And so I knew a lot of people at Cornwall Terrace and spent a lot of time with them, and was in that kind of free festival hippie anarchist crowd, people like Sid Rawle and Ubi Dwyer and such characters who were around in that era. So I began to wonder, well, which one's the real me? Is it, am I the fox hunting type, or the hippie anarchist, or the academic, or the kind of hard drinking public school old boy and such like? So it was a puzzle, and so one of the things that I really relish about the years I had at university was that it gave me 3 years. Even though I suppose I should have been focusing on my academic studies more, it was just gave me 3 years to look at that and to explore, well, what really is important to me. And the outcome of that was that the only thing that was really important to me was spirituality. So that's why as soon as I finished my degree, pretty much I took off for Asia and then ended up in a monastery. So, but anyway, this is just my particular snapshot of the lives that I was having at that time, but that really seeded that question, and I could see then, and I can see now, how many of us get granted particular identities given by our family, saying, you're going to be a doctor. Like, oh really? Oh, okay. Or you're a woman, you're a man, you're British, you're Sri Lankan, you're Thai, you're American, you're Portuguese, you get labeled by your nationality, by your gender, by your disposition, by your parents' expectations. The forces of society and life kind of steer us into these different identities, and that question of, well, who am I, and what's really important, what's meaningful, just gets shoved into the background because I've got exams to pass, I've got expectations of people to meet, and I've got my own ambition to fulfill. When we consider these issues of self, then this is not just an area that's dealt with by religious teachings, but also within the psychological realm and philosophical realm as well. So you can break down or look at the different kind of selves that we conjure up or that we live with, along with the particular career paths and such like. All of us experience a variety of different things that we are, say, referring to when we use the word I. So there's the bodily self. There's this person, this form that has a certain configuration, a height, a weight, an age, and so on. So there's the bodily self. When we say, who am I? Well, I'm this, this body. This is what I am. And then there's the self that is the center of perceptions, that I am looking at you. I'm sitting here with my back to the east, I'm facing to the west, I'm looking out here in the sala at Amravati on a Sunday afternoon. So there's myself who is sitting here and is looking in that direction. So there's the self, the feeling of I that's built up out of the perceptions that we're experiencing, and the perspective that we have. It may be if you're partially sighted or you're blind or you're hard of hearing or deaf, then you're experiencing a different configuration. If English is not your first language, then maybe there's a few of the words I'm using that you're struggling with and can't quite catch, and so on. Or just the very fact that you're looking this direction at one person and I'm looking in that direction at 100 people. So there's what you can call the perspectival self, like the I that is generated from the field of perceptions that are experienced. Then there's the I that makes choices. You can say the intentional or the volitional self, the me that seems to be choosing which words to say, choosing to come along to a Sunday talk. Or there seems to be this me that makes decisions, who made the decision to follow your parents' expectations or to go to this school or rather that school or to wear this shirt rather than that shirt today. So there's the me who makes choices. You can say the intentional self. Then there's what you can call the self that we create through our narrative, my story. I was born in Kent, 1956. This is my story. So each of us has a narrative, a history that we tell. When someone says, well, who are you? You say, well, I was born in Kent, or I was born in Surrey, or I was born in France, or in Sri Lanka, Thailand. That's who I am. This is my story. And we put together that kind of composite, so that the narrative me. And then there is who we are in society. People say, oh, you're the Ajahn, or you're the doctor, or you're the Anagarika, you're the guest nun. You are you're one of the regulars to the Sunday afternoon talks. That's who you are. I see you all the time. So we exist in society in a particular role. So I am abbot of, so my social self, if you like, in this place is I am abbot of Amravati. With my family, my social self is I'm the baby brother. I'm not the abbot. I'm to my sisters, I'm not their abbot. I'm not their Dhamma teacher. I'm their little brother. I'm not complaining. That's just how, in society. So each of us participates in these different kind of selves. So when you say, well, who are you? You say, well, I'm a doctor, or I'm a Sri Lankan, I'm British, I'm comfortable, I'm uncomfortable, I'm sitting here, I am 60 years old. All of these apply at different times, right? This is the kind of different selves that we occupy, or we kind of take part in at any one particular time. Now, it's kind of interesting along the way that the Latin word for a mask is persona. We use the word person in English, comes from the Latin persona. And the word per means through. And sona is sound. So persona is that which the sound goes through. So a persona is a mask. Like an actor on the Greek or the Roman stage would wear a mask. That's a persona. So right there in the word for one of these things, it's a mask. it's a presentation. So do you present your how do you present yourself as a woman, as a man, as old, as young, as a Buddhist practitioner, as a doctor, as a student? What's your mask? Who are you? And so that right there in the very word that we use in English, there's a clue that this is an appearing, a seeming. It's a mask. So then the question is, well, if the person is the mask, what's behind the mask? We'll get to that. So it's very interesting. I came across a few years ago that we might think that the Buddhist teachings have a kind of monopoly on insight into selflessness, but there was a comment written by the Scottish philosopher David Hume in his treatise on human nature that he wrote in the 1730s, where he said, "There are some philosophers who imagine we are every moment intimately conscious of what we call ourself. For my part, when I enter most intimately into what I call myself, I always stumble upon some particular perception or other, of heat or cold, light or shade, love or hatred, pain or pleasure. I never can catch myself at any time without a perception, and never can observe anything but the perception. When my perceptions are removed for any time, as by sound sleep, so long am I insensible of myself, and may truly be said not to exist. I may venture to affirm of the rest of mankind that they are nothing but a bundle or a collection of different perceptions which succeed each other with an inconceivable rapidity and are in a perpetual flux and movement." So there are some theories that David Hume actually came across Buddhist teachings when he was in France, when he was writing that book. There was also a Jesuit college in that little town of La Flèche, in the College of La Flèche in France. So there's some theories that he got some Buddhist teachings from a couple of Jesuits, one who'd been in Siam and another who'd been in Tibet. But I think also that it's not just David Hume, or not just within the Buddhist field, but this is something that's been observed also by the Greek philosophers also, like Pyrrho in particular, who, in the same way, when they look for this mysterious self who is the experiencer, the doer, the owner of the body, no particular thing can be found. When we look for the self, the doer, the owner, the experiencer, when that I, that mysterious self, is searched for, no particular thing can be found. So, I wouldn't say that the Buddha was the only one who came across that, but certainly within other fields of study and thinking and exploration, human beings around the world have had the same kind of discovery. But maybe I would, even though obviously I'm a little bit biased, being a Buddhist monk, I would say that within the Buddhist tradition we have the most clearly articulated way of exploring this kind of question. And particularly the Buddha's teachings on the three characteristics of existence, on impermanence or uncertainty, anicca, unsatisfactoriness, dukkha, and not self, anatta. These teachings as being the universal characteristics of all experienced reality, I would say is a most comprehensive teaching, and also the practice of insight meditation, vipassana, as a way of exploring this feeling of I and me and mine, the feeling of being, the feeling of self and identity. It's the most clearly and fully articulated way of exploring that. Again, I admit I'm thoroughly biased, but I don't really know of any other spiritual method or psychological method around the world that looks so directly and so fully and in such a comprehensive way at this experience. So when we talk about insight meditation or vipassana, then it's geared towards looking at the very nature of experience itself. Last week I was talking about how the mind creates its own version of the world. So vipassana meditation is to do with the means whereby that world can be explored and can be seen in a most complete and unbiased way, to see its nature, what that world is. And in particular, to explore this feeling of I, who is the experiencer of the world, or the one who's acting in the world, or the one who's the apparent person who's in the middle of the world, or is the knower of the world. When we practice insight meditation, probably most of you are somewhat familiar with that, but the basic methodology is to use some means of calming the mind, to focus the attention on the present, using something like the mindfulness of breathing, or using a mantra meditation, or some way of establishing the mind to a degree of tranquility, and a degree of tranquility sufficient just to be able to keep the attention on the present moment. So, with the mind being able to focus on the present, then the flow of experience can be witnessed. So, say for example, you establish concentration by focusing on the breath. That helps the attention to be keyed into the present. Once the mind is calmed and focused and steady enough, the attention is grounded in the present reality. Then, rather than focusing on a particular object like the breath or a mantra or another feeling or a sound, then the attention is deliberately broadened to include all the flow of experience. So with what we call insight meditation, vipassana, there's a deliberate opening of the field of attention. So rather than focusing on a single object, the whole content of the present becomes the meditation object. So whether the ears are receiving a sound, or there's a sensation in the body, or a memory arises, or a plan for the future, or a wave of excitement or irritation, different emotions arise, then vipassana meditation is the process of recognizing, irritation arising and passing away, sound arising and passing away, feeling arising and passing away, remembering arising and passing away, planning arising and passing away. The mind stays in the position of observation and reflection, and is receiving and knowing and letting go of all of the content of experience, to be fully aware of the process of experience. So letting go of the content to know the process. So rather than, say, paying attention to the content of my what I'm saying now, my words, just in a sense broadening the attention to recognize, sound is changing, hearing is changing, perceptions are changing. So you're deliberately taking the attention off the content, the meaning or the value, even whether it's inside or outside, whether it's pleasant or painful, sacred or profane or neutral. Rather, is it changing? Is it unsatisfactory? Can it be permanently pleasing? And in particular, with respect to the theme for today, is it mine? Is it something that belongs to me? And if it does, what's this me that is the apparent owner? So that the process of insight meditation is built around, if you like, deconstructing that sense of I'm sitting here paying attention to my body, or I'm sitting here meditating, I'm sitting here listening to the sounds of the birds outside, or I'm paying attention to the feelings in my legs. And it takes that initial experience and then deconstructs it. Rather than I am feeling this, I am doing this, I'm experiencing this, it deconstructs that. It's an insight, it's a seeing into the way that experience is formed, so that sense of I'm here, the world is out there, I am meditating, I am hearing, I'm feeling, I'm thinking, I'm remembering, I'm planning, I'm wishing my thinking would stop. Whatever it might be, that it's deconstructing the habitual judgment of self to look more deeply and completely into what this is, what this present experience is formed of, and what its reality can truly said to be. So, say for example, when we're sitting in meditation, and you hear the sound of a bird, or here we're very blessed to be close to Luton Airport, so we have regular planes flying over, going this way, going that way. So you often have the sound of planes passing by. If you're on a meditation retreat with 55 other people, then there's plenty of people coughing, shuffling, clearing their throats. So there's a hearing a sound. So when you hear a bird, pigeons crowing in the morning, or a plane going overhead, most of us don't have a sense of ownership of the sound. We don't say that's my sound, or I own that pigeon's sound. If you do, you've probably got some deep psychological problems. You know? But we wouldn't claim ownership of it. We might say, I hear it, I'm the one hearing the sound of the plane or the bird, or I'm the one hearing that person cough, but we wouldn't feel a sense of ownership of that object. So usually the easiest things to see as not self and not being who and what we are is a perception, like seeing something. I don't think that red of the back wall of the sala is mine, or the blue of the carpet. I don't think of myself as the owner of that. I don't have a personal relationship with blue or red, and so forth. So perceptions are the easiest thing, I would say. People's experience varies, so these are generalizations. But generally, it's easiest to see that this is not mine, or not who and what I am. So then a little bit more challenging is feelings, like sensations in the body, so that you might be able to not identify with the sound of a plane, or that when you explain, well, even that feeling of me hearing, that's not really a me, that's just, there's hearing, that's all. And that's fairly easy to let go of and to not identify with. That pain in the leg, it's like, ow, that really feels like my knee. Ow. And so that's more personal, it's more immediate. But again, when that's explored, there's a feeling of my pain, my knee, oh dear, what's happening there? But when that's in the same way explored and examined, well, how is that pain mine? And if it is mine, what's the me that is the owner? Like David Hume, sort of looking for, who's the experiencer? You can't find a self who is the one who owns the perceptions. Yeah, okay, I can say I'm feeling pain, or that's my knee that's hurting. What's the referent? What's the me that is the owner? What does that look like? Does that have a shape, a location? What, a size, a weight? What is it? Yeah. And no defined form or quality can really be found other than knowing. So then sensations are a little bit easier to let go of than the next layer in, which is thoughts, and that trusty narrative self, the me, my meditation, my life, my debts, my hopes, my achievements, my problems, the stories that the mind tells, so that even if with insight we can let go of the sensations and to see those as being not who and what we are, and not having an owner, then those thoughts, those memories, and all the things I've done well, all the things I've done badly, the things I should be doing, my views and opinions about the people that I live with, my family, and then all of that seems a lot more personal. Memories of things, that only we remember, no one else knows about. That thing that I did back when I was 4 years old, no one else knows. It's a huge secret. I was the only one who understood, who burnt down the barn. I didn't, that I'm aware of. But so something that we think only we know about, no one else knows about, that's incredibly personal, that really seems to have this I and mine quality. That again, there's a memory that arises. It takes shape, does its thing, passes away. It's got this name written on it, but what is that name referring to? When I say I remember, or I did, or that was me who did that, who felt that, who achieved that. Then it takes a little bit more to deconstruct those stories. But again, with insight, then the more that they're explored and examined and investigated, then even those stories and those narratives of our life and our all the the rights and wrongs and injustices and achievements and so forth, identities that come from our stories, they too can be seen as being empty of self and what belongs to a self. So then a little bit further in, beyond the thoughts and those stories, then kind of connected to them, but even more deep, are the emotions that are associated with it. So not just sensations of pleasure or pain in the body, but the emotions of, say, that you're heartbroken, you have, unrequited loves, or you have resentments of, how you've been done wrong by the government or by your ex-partner or by your current partner, your Ajahn, and those strong emotions, feelings of jealousy, feelings of infatuation, feelings of irritation, feelings of resentment, feelings of excitement, so that even I would say for most people, even more deep than the thinking, the emotions seem to be really real and substantial. No, I know I should love that person, but I hate him. I can't, and I can't stand that person. I can't get rid of that feeling. I see that person and I just hate them. So, or I don't love them or whatever it might be. So that but in exactly the same way, along with conceptual thought and those narratives, emotions, and seemingly strong and deep emotions can still seem to be real and substantial until they're opened up and explored. So like the layers of the onion, you're kind of going deeper and deeper into this onion of identity, and but each layer in, where it seems to be more substantial, more essential, more real, as the mind explores and examines and questions, then each layer is revealed to be, well, no, there isn't really anything there. There's no person there. There's no substantial, real I. And then maybe the most difficult thing or most convincing aspect of identity is the choice maker. That which is say, I decided to come to the Sunday afternoon talk. I decided to pick this title. I'm choosing to get up and leave the room. I'm choosing to speak to this person and not speak to that person. It really feels like there's a me who's making decisions. And then, if you've been studying Buddhist teachings and Buddhist philosophy, but surely, Ajahn, we're the owners of our karma, we're the heirs to our karma, born of our karma, related to our karma. That karma is the choices, it's the intentions. Karma is real, right? And so that can seem like the most sort of gritty and gnarly and substantial basic quality of identity is that the choice maker. This me that is deciding and following different impulses towards kindness and generosity, or towards selfishness and so on. But again, in exactly the same way, and you don't have to believe me, but hopefully with meditation and exploration, you could see this for yourself. When you open it up, there even with an intention and a choice, when you deconstruct it a little bit, there's still no person there. Like the mind is presented with a variety of possibilities. I could do, there's this, and this. So what looks most interesting? So there's the perception of the possibilities. Then there's the memory. Okay, what had a pleasant result in the past? What had a painful result in the past? So the perception of the possibilities is not self. Memory, remembering past successes, failures, pleasure and pain is not self. Then the recognition, okay, well that worked well last time, that memory seems to match this possibility, so maybe that's the best way forward. So that perception, that thinking, that kind of calculation is also not self. It doesn't really have an owner. And then that the choice to say, well, let's try that one and see what happens. That's also a thought, and then the action following it, the choosing to walk that way or speak in those words, those actions of moving or those words that arise, those similarly are not who and what we are. They're not self. They don't have an owner. And once again, I'm making these kind of broad statements, but and they are open for discussion. But I would suggest that when you take even a decision-making process apart, you really can't find anybody there that's doing the choosing. So, yes, there are the laws of karma. This action brings this result. But when you look for the individual entity who's the owner of the karma, it's really difficult to find, what that is, or to fix that as a separate individual entity. Now, the Buddha was a pragmatist, not a an idealist, which means to say he taught in a very pragmatic way. So he didn't say the true self is this. Your true self is the absolute reality. Or he didn't use kind of highfalutin philosophical, metaphysical language to talk about a true self or a real self or the real me, because he realized to some extent whatever you can, and he said these words: whatever you conceive it to be, the truth is always other than that. Yena hi manyanti tatatang hoti anyatati. Whatever you conceive it to be, the fact is always other than that. So whatever you think you are, that thought can't be it. So he realized that from very early on. So his whole method was to teach us how to stop identifying with what we're not, and then what is real becomes apparent on its own. Then the thinking mind can jump in and say, that's what I am. I'm undifferentiated awareness. That's what I am. But that's just a thought. That's just a collection of words and concepts. That thought of I am this or that thought is not what we are. That's just a thought. So the Buddha's method was to try and help us to establish that mind which abides in that quality of liberated awareness, rather than creating a concept which is something that the mind grabs onto and tries to get born into. Now, one of the most helpful methods of exploring this and developing this kind of insight, many years ago, back in 1981, if I remember correctly, it's a long time ago now, getting over 35 years ago, nearly 40 years ago. So during one of the first winter retreats that we had at Chithurst, this was before any of the branch monasteries were opened up by Ajahn Amaro in this country. So this was the winter of 1981. So we had a community retreat at Chithurst, and the house was still a bit of a wreck. So we only had what's now the reception room there. The shrine room in the house still had a huge hole in the floor. There was holes in the roof, and much of the building was uninhabitable. But we did have the shrine room, what's now the reception room. So we were all gathered in there for our winter retreat. And the winter retreat was only 2 weeks long, or 3 weeks long. But during this time, then there was a couple of meditation methods that Luang Por Sumedho taught that were incredibly helpful. And he taught a particular method of inquiry that he had used himself before he became a monk in Thailand. And first of all, he began teaching the meditation on what's called the sound of silence, or the inner sound, the nada in Sanskrit, which is listening to the sort of background tone that appears in our hearing. Most people, if you listen closely, there's a kind of high-pitched, subtle tone that's in the background of hearing almost all the time. Some people have tinnitus and say, "Yeah, it's not in the background now, John. I can't get it to shut up. I spent thousands of pounds, trying to get rid of it." So for most people, it's in the background. Some people, it's very much in the foreground. But it's a faculty of the experiential world and the hearing that it can be used as a meditation object. So Luang Por Sumedho had used this a lot himself as a focal point for meditation. And so the English winters, particularly in the countryside, are very, very quiet. So he'd begun to teach this meditation on the inner sound as an alternative to mindfulness of breathing, so that there was a lot of sort of quietness and a lot of focus, even though it was about 25 or 30 people squished into a very small room. So that teaching of the meditation on the inner sound was a very helpful sort of preparation. And then he brought into the picture the use of inquiry and asking this very question: who am I? So he would encourage us to focus on the inner sound, to concentrate on that as much as possible. And when the mind was really quiet and there was just the hearing of the nada, then to drop into that internal space, the psychological space, the question: who am I? To put aside all other thought and question and just to ask very sincerely and very directly, who am I? Now, this was a method, as I said, that he had used before he went to Ajahn Chah's monastery, and he'd learnt it when he was in the American Peace Corps. He lived in Borneo, in a little town called Semporna. He taught Chinese. He was a Chinese speaker. Lumpur Sumedho studied Chinese at university and taught in a Chinese school in Borneo. And he was very interested in Buddhism, and particularly in Zen Buddhism. And he had a friend who sent him these books that were written by Charles Luke, who was one of the early Buddhist scholars. And there was a series called Chan and Zen Training that had been written and translated by Charles Luke. And in one of them there was the Dharma talks from a meditation retreat led by great master Shu Yun. And it was a retreat that he had led at the age of 114 in Shanghai. And in these talks, and he describes this method of meditation on the question, who am I? And exactly with this method, you bring the mind to as deep a quality of quietness as possible, and then the mind poses the question, who am I? Now, the point of the question is not to come up with some kind of clever philosophical answer, and your own name is definitely not the answer. That's not what it's about. But rather, it's called the Chinese speakers here hopefully will forgive my bad pronunciation, but it's called a huatou. Is that right? Yeah. Close enough? Well, so it means that the head and the tail. And so that the question is the head, and then the silence that follows the question. The sort of, the pause, the gap in the mind before the thinking sort of wades in and says, I'm awareness, that's what I am, or I'm the one who knows, or I am Sumedho, or he would have been Robert then, but, before the thinking mind jumps in, that becomes the object of attention. So that the question is the head, and then the tail is really the important bit. So that he used this and found it incredibly helpful as a meditation. So he would ask that question, who am I? And then focus on that gap. Because when the mind is not busy, it's very quiet and focused, then when you drop that into the space of the mind, what it recognizes is who's the wrong question. This isn't a who, it's more of a what. And so in a sense it trips up the thinking mind, it trips up the self-creating mind, the ahankara, the I-making mamankara, the mind-making habit. It kind of falls over its own feet, because at that moment the intuition says, who doesn't really apply. And so before any thought takes shape, there's this kind of space, this gap, as Lumpur Sumedho would call it. And he'd say, that's the thing to aim the attention on, is that gap before the thinking mind and the self-creating mind wades in and starts creating some idea of a me. In that moment, the mind is awake. There's no sense of self. There's a quality of simplicity and limitlessness. That's the answer, as it were. And so then, and you can develop this. So I found that incredibly helpful teaching and a very, very powerful practice to do, because, as I said, when you ask the question, who am I, after asking it a couple of times, who becomes ridiculous. So then you can, and also it's not that you can only ask who am I, but you can tweak the question or the statement. So then so instead of asking who am I, then I'd say, what am I? What am I? Because what seemed to be more realistic than who. But then the I started to feel really weird, like, well, that the I doesn't quite seem to match the reality. So then rather than what am I let that develop into what is it? But then even the it started to feel kind of cumbersome and clunky, and like, well, this isn't really an it. So then, as the inquiry would develop, I'd notice that even asking what is it seemed to be out of place or too sort of intrusive, or kind of filling up the space of awareness. So I began to just use what. Then even what is too presumptuous about, well, it's saying that there's a thing here, either a thing that's a knower or a thing that is known. Even what seemed to be too much, until finally there's just this question mark. And then the question mark would disappear, and there's just a point. And then even the point would disappear, and there's just pointlessness. So this talk is about being completely pointless. There's incidentally, as an aside, there's a really wonderful little cartoon with songs by Harry Nilsson called The Point, which is a very, very beautiful sort of exploration of this similar kind of area for children. About this child who's born, everyone is born in the land of point, and everybody has a point on their head. And there's one little kid who's born called Oblio who has no point. And he goes off, he gets thrown out of the village because he hasn't got a point. And then he gets banished to the pointless forest. Anyway. That's a bit of a side issue. But, in terms of this area, I really recommend this as a practice. And some people have criticized this as saying, asking who am I, that's ridiculous. The Buddha said all dhammas are not self, so it's a pointless question. That's the point. The point is that you discover it's a wrong question. But not as a theory or as an idea, but you discover it's the wrong question from your own wisdom. Your own wisdom recognizes this isn't really a who. The mind is not a person. Oh, and not just as hearing the words, like you can hear me say the mind is not a person. But it's discovering that kind of from the inside, as it were. So the point of this kind of inquiry is that is a revealing the presumptions that the mind makes about what we are and opening that up, and then using that experience of the mind, knowing that gap, knowing that spaciousness when the question falls away and before an answer forms, and letting that, in a sense, be the baseline of experience. In other spiritual traditions, say, like in Advaita Vedanta, they use the kind of opposite approach where they meditate on the I am. And so when they ask the question, who am I, rather than the Buddhist approach of emptying out the I am, they take have a different philosophical framework. But I would suggest, and maybe this can be discussed a bit more in the questions and answers and discussion time. I would suggest that the point is exactly the same, or the method is really a little bit different, but the goal is exactly the same. So rather than taking the I am and emptying it out and seeing it as intrinsically void of substance, it kind of expands the I am to include everything. So but it's also, when say I am, but taking a concept like I am the universe or I am everything, rather than I am nothing, that both of them are ways of approaching the mind's habit of conceiving and rejigging the way that it is looked at and explored, in order to help your own wisdom faculty, your own heart, to know the reality of what is. Now, in Buddhist philosophy, there are two different layers or two different ways of this letting go of self is talked about. So two different depths of, kind of different distances into the onion, if you like. So the Buddha used a framework of 10 fetters, or what they call the samyojana as the 10 obstacles to enlightenment. So a fetter is like handcuffs or shackles or chains. That's what a fetter means. So the 10 fetters of the 10 chains or handcuffs and things that tie the heart down. So and they represent the different levels of enlightenment. So that the first level of enlightenment, stream entry, involves letting go of the first 3 fetters. And of those 3 fetters, number 1 is self-view, sakkaya ditthi. So and when we talk about letting go of self or the development of insight into not self, the first layer is this the insight into self-view, into sakkaya ditthi. And so again, Luang Por Sumedho would very helpfully describe this as identification with the body. It's the belief, I am the body, I am the personality. I am this person. I'm a woman, I'm a man, I'm old, I'm young, I'm English, I'm French, I'm Thai, I'm Sri Lankan, I'm American. That's what I am. So sakkaya ditthi is that belief that those are true and substantial qualities. To break through sakkaya ditthi is to recognize that can't be the whole story. That's not really what I am. So that in order for stream entry to be realized, that level of attachment identification has to fall away. But there's a whole extra layer, sort of a lot deeper into the onion, which is not broken through until arahantship, which is called asmimana. So you have, 4 levels of enlightenment: stream entry, once returning, non-returning, and then arahantship, full enlightenment. So the more subtle level of identification is called asmimana. Asmi means I am. It's the Pali for I am. Mana is conceit. So it's called the conceit of identity, or this conceit of I am. And there's a very lovely teaching I reflect on and quote quite often, and it concerns a monk called Venerable Khemaka, and he was very old and reaching the end of his life, and so he's living in this monastery, and his friends said, well, Khemaka, you're getting towards the end of your life. Have you completed your practice? Have you realized arahantship yet? And he's on his deathbed. And so he sends, and there's a whole sort of beginning part of the sutta where he sends a message back saying, yeah, no, I haven't reached the end of the path yet. And they say, well, how have you not reached the end of the path yet? Sends messages back and forth. And finally, he gets so fed up with these friends of his harassing him from a distance, he gets up and goes to go and visit them. Gets off his deathbed. So, these bloody friends of mine won't leave me alone. So anyway, it turns into this dialogue, between Venerable Khemaka and his friends. And, and he gives this very beautiful analogy. He says, I've been practicing a long time, and there is no identification with any of the 5 khandhas. So with the body, with feelings, perceptions, mental formations, or consciousness, discriminative consciousness. So it's really clear. So he's saying, definitely self-view, Sakkaya Ditthi, has really been broken through. There's no belief that I'm the body, I'm the personality. But there's still this feeling of I that is around. It's not attached to anything, but it just persists. He says, like with a flower, you can smell the flower, but you can't tell where the fragrance comes from. Does it come from the petals, or from the pollen, or from the stamens, or the sepals, or the stalk? You can't tell, but the fragrance is there. He said in exactly the same way, that this feeling of I is here, but it's not attached to the body, or my thoughts, or my feelings, or emotions, or any of it, but it's still, there's this I feeling. But as he's giving this description about, and so he's describing asmimana, so asmimana is that what they call a conceit of identity that is not attached to any particular thing, any experience, but in and of itself, it's like the core, say, contraction of mind that says I. Even if it's not I am anything, it's just this I-ness, me-ness, or in Pali, ahankara, made of I am, mamankara, made of mindness. And very interestingly, I think it's the only instance where he actually became an arahant hearing his own Dhamma talk. Because he sort of completed his practice as he's giving this explanation to his friends. And so a few of them became arahants as well. So it's you can get enlightened hearing your own Dhamma talk. So if people complain about you talking to yourself, you can maybe use that as an excuse. I'm trying to enlighten myself by hearing my own Dhamma talk. You know. So so this is, as I was saying earlier, that whatever you conceive it to be, the truth is always other than that. Yena hi manyanti tatatang hoti anyatati. So that's a common phrase that the Buddha uses in the teachings, and it's a simple statement. Whatever you conceive it to be, the truth is always other than that, which means that the reality of what is, or kind of what we are, is inconceivable. It's not something that can be conceived. Now, when we talk about a concept, in the Western world, we praise and revere thinking, and we assume that a thought is the ultimate reality. In the Buddhist understanding of things, it's kind of the opposite. And the Buddha says, conceiving, manyati, conceiving is a cancer, it's a disease, it's a problem. It's alien, it's a state of suffering. That conceiving, like saying, I am this, as soon as this is real, this is true, as soon as the mind takes a thing and tries to make it real, or make this I as an individual entity, right there is dukkha. And so some people might feel that it's a kind of nihilistic philosophy, but I would say it's quite the opposite. Rather, the Buddha's teaching this to help us to stop suffering, to not be creating those I ams. And oftentimes when we reflect on anatta, or people talk about anatta, then they think, well, it means I have to believe I don't exist, that I'm not real, and it's confusing because for many people, because it can seem to say that I'm supposed to believe I'm not here, when our experience of this present reality is the most real thing we know. Our whatever color or shape or flavor it has, this quality of awareness, this knowing of this present, this is the most real. This in my experience. This is the most real thing there is knowing, is being aware. But and so it can be frustrating that the Buddha says, well, you can't conceive. As soon as you try to conceive that or put that into a box or make it into a person or an identity, the heart has lost the reality of that awake quality. It's being born into a box, into a pod, into a limitation, into a persona, into a mask. And there's the last thing I'd like to share as for this talk is a teaching that I've reflected a lot recently, where the Buddha is kind of talking about his own subjective experience, and it's in a dialogue between the Buddha and Vacchagotta, who was one of his indefatigable inquirers. When he was a wanderer. He wasn't originally a disciple of the Buddha. He was a wanderer from a different group. But he kept coming to see the Buddha and ask questions. And off in the future, the whole book about Vacchagotta deserves to be written. But I've got other books on the go already. One day, I'd like to write a whole collection of things about the Buddha and Vacchagotta. But anyway, in this dialogue with Vacchagotta, it's where the Vacchagotta's been asking the Buddha, what happens to an enlightened being after the death of the body? Where do they go? And the Buddha's already explained that you can't say where do they go. Reappears in another place doesn't apply. Doesn't reappear does not apply. Both reappears and doesn't reappear does not apply. Neither reappears nor does not reappear. None of those apply. And Vacchagotta's like, it's got to be one of those, please, give me a break. Yeah. And the Buddha said Vaccha. And then then this is where the Buddha talks about his own subjective experience. I mean, I know it's not quite accurate to say that, but close. What he says is that he's talking about his own experience. He says, Vacchagotta, that material form, whereby one trying to describe the Tathagata, the Buddha, would describe him, that material form, that feeling, that perception, that mental formations, that consciousness, that one trying to describe the Tathagata would describe him, that has been cut off at the root, made like a palm tree stump, deprived of the conditions of existence, and rendered incapable of arising in the future. The Tathagata is liberated from being reckoned in terms of material form, feeling, perceptions, mental formations, discriminative consciousness. He is profound, immeasurable, unfathomable, like the ocean. So the Tathagata is liberated from being reckoned in terms of material form, the body, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, consciousness. He is profound, immeasurable, unfathomable, like the ocean. So he is, there's an isness, but that isness can't be reckoned in terms of form, feeling, perception, mental formations, consciousness, three-dimensional space, time, individuality. None of that applies. All of that does not apply. That whole languaging, that framework does not apply. But there's, the Tathagata is. So it kind of takes away our familiar handholds and reference points with one hand, but says, yeah, but here is the Tathagata. And when we talk about the Tathagata, it's not just talking about the Buddha as a spiritual teacher of 2,500 years ago, but it's talking about that knowing mind of yours, that in you which is awake, is profound, immeasurable, unfathomable, like the ocean, but is also cannot be reckoned in terms of form, feeling, perception, mental formations, consciousness. So on that point, I think it's time to pause. Time for a cup of tea, this being England. Have a tea break, and then we can come back together again about 20 past for discussion and questions and responses.